I'm Karen Stangroom and welcome to my channel Conquer Crochet. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and make sure you hit the notification bell, because just hitting subscribe does not mean that you will end up getting notifications. So hit the bell as well and you won't miss a single stitch. If you've missed any of the videos, or if you're brand new to crochet, or you just want a quick refresher course, click in the cards up here and I will make sure that I put in a link there for my beginners crochet course playlist, so you can go back and you can check to see if you've missed any of the videos. If you're ready, let's get going. Okay, so today I'm going to show you how you can make this really super cute, very chunky coffee cozy. Keep your hands clear of the heat from your takeaway coffee cup, and it's also good for the environment because you're not using the throwaway but recyclable cardboard covers. And actually I find they're not very useful anyway, so we're going to make one of these today. We're going to be using chain stitch, the half treble and the double crochet. So you're going to need some snippers for cutting off your ends. You're going to need a needle. I'm using one of these ones with the special eyes on the end for sewing in chunkier yarn. I'm going to be using an 8mm hook because I am going to be using some super chunky yarn. Now this yarn came from a British store called B&M. It's £2.99 for the ball. I think you'd probably get 2 cozies out of this at a guess. It is 71% acrylic and 29% wool. It is a hand wash only. Now it does recommend on here to use a 10mm hook, but I wanted to use the 8 because I wanted to make the actual pieces a little bit tighter, the stitches a bit tighter. If you're using a normal chunky yarn rather than a super chunky yarn, I would suggest maybe going up to a 9mm hook or the 10mm hook, just to make sure the sizing is okay. Now with this super chunky yarn, if you look carefully, you can see it has like a thread going around it to hold the yarn in position. You need to be very careful when using this yarn because it's quite easy to catch that thread and then start pulling it, and if you pull it, it might break and then other things start to go wrong, and that's just not a good place to be. So we're going to start off with our slip knot. Obviously everything is bigger now because we're using the super chunky yarn, and I'm going to chain 20. Okay, so that's 10. You can see already that's actually quite big compared to some of the chains we were doing. If you look back at the charm bracelet video, if you've watched that video, this was using the double knit cotton. There's a massive difference in size. That was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, oops, 16, 17, 18, and I've done it there. You see I caught that little red bit from the stitch, just need to take that out. And I've lost count now. Let's start from the count. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Oops, 20. Okay, so what we need to do now is to bring our hook over I'm going into the very first chain that we had, insert our hook and make a slip stitch. So yarn over, put it through that chain. We don't yarn over again, we just put it through the loop on our hook, and there we have our first, oops, come back. There we have our loop. That's the size that we're going to need. Now if you want to test it out on a cup, now is the time to do it. If it's not going to fit on the cup you've got, you might want to make it bigger or smaller. But do remember that this will stretch, so if you think, oh, that's not big enough, give it a stretch first before you do anything else. Now we are going to be doing half trebles, but because we're using a chunky yarn, we're only going to chain one. I find the chain two is just too big for what we want to do. Okay, let's tighten that up there. And we're going to go into this stitch here. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull back through 1 and 2 and 3. Make sure I've got enough yarn here so I'm not pulling it too tightly. Okay, yarn over, insert through the next stitch, yarn over, pull back through all 3. Caught that red there. Just got to be very careful when you're doing this, you're not catching any extra bits or you're not taking in bits from the other side. I think if you're using a more expensive yarn, you probably wouldn't get these issues, but at £2.99 it's certainly worth a punt at seeing how you get on with the chunkier yarn. I have to say it's not my favourite to work with. I find that I'm gripping too tight, my shoulders start getting tense, and you have to relax your shoulders, give them a roll, stretch your hands out because I hold on to the hook too tightly as well. And it's the same for all crocheters. When you're doing something new, you do get a little bit tense. Nope. Oh, I seem to have come over there. I'm going to take that back through, find out what happened. There we are. I didn't take it all through with me. There we are. So this pattern works in rounds. Some patterns you find when you're working around, they work in spirals, but what we're going to do at the end of the row is to slip stitch into the first half treble of the row. Then we're going to chain one, and then we're going to start the next row. That way then you end up with a flatter top rather than something that suddenly stops. And I think you get a nicer finish with it as well. Oops. I would recommend not pulling the yarn like I did just now. It's not a good idea. So how are you finding using the chunkier yarn? Let me know in the comments below which sort of yarns you prefer. I've said before I actually prefer using a cotton, particularly I like the patterns cotton, although they don't have a vast range of colours. I do find that it actually flows quite nicely in my hand. But for a beginner, that's quite a tricky yarn to use because it's cotton and there is no elasticity in it at all. Okay, so I want to go into this one. Go in. I do like this pink. I think I'm a little obsessed with pink. There we go. Okay. So here is the chain that we did. And this is the stitch we need to go into. So the chain's the one that gave us the height. So we need to go into the slip stitch. So you can go around and count if you want to see which number you get to. You should get to 20. So I'm going to slip stitch in there, give myself a bit more yarn, chain 1, and I'm going to start the 3rd row. So the first row is the chain, the foundation chain. The second row is the half trebles. Then we're going to have 3rd, 4th and 5th row are going to be trebles as well. So if you wait to the end of the video, I will give you a link to download the PDF pattern for this, so that you'll be able to print it off and take it with you on your travels. What's quite nice about this is you don't need to take much with you if you were traveling somewhere. It's something you could easily do in the car if you're a passenger, obviously, or you could just do anywhere if you're sitting waiting for somebody somewhere, sitting in a waiting room somewhere, then it's quite a nice pattern to do. You haven't got to think about it too much. It's a simple stitch that we've covered before, and we're currently on round 3. So I'm going to pause the video here, and I will come back to you when we get to round 5, which means we will have done 1 row of chains and joined them up, and we will have done 4 rows of the half treble. See you in a bit. Okay, so I finished my last round. So I have 1 row of chains, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of half treble. I now need to do my slip stitch into that first half treble of that round. Okay, now the next row I'm going to chain 1, and we're going to double crochet all the way round. Now I do find this chunky yarn a lot harder to work with, and it doesn't flow as smoothly as the cotton yarn that I'm used to working with. So I need to make sure that I am relaxing my hand, I'm not gripping onto the hook too tightly, and that I stretch. If I need to stop, just put the work down, stretch your fingers out, and then pick it up again. Looking after your hands and your shoulders when you're crocheting is very important. It's very easy, and you don't realise sometimes how tense you're actually getting as you're crocheting. So this super chunky yarn is actually going to be a really nice barrier between the hot drink and your hands. You can see it's quite a thick stitch that we've got going there. So that's going to be quite a nice chunky holder for us, and also helping us to help someone else if we're giving it as a gift, to save the environment and not have to keep using the cardboard protectors you get from the big coffee chains. There is no product placement here. Okay. Oops. Where did we get to? There we are, that was our starting one, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 15, oops, 16, 17, 18, 19, oops, and 20. So this one here was our chain 1, once you put that back into place there. So we're going to slip stitch into the last stitch, then do our finishing off chain, and we're going to cut the yarn. Oops. And there we have our coffee holder. Now if you're a bit more advanced, you could make a base for this, crocheting in a round, and then work your way up the sides, and you'd actually have quite a nice little pot for storing your hooks in. And I will be showing you that in the video much later on. So we need to weave in our ends. So I'm going to be using one of these crocheting or knitters needles, because I need to be able to get through this super chunky yarn, otherwise I'm not going to be able to weave it in. And make sure I've got all the strands through there. And these are great because you do have the flexibility. With the tapestry needles, you really don't. Okay. I'm going to weave down just a few rows, and then I'm going to weave back up just to make sure it's extra secure. And snip off that end. And then do the same for the slip knot that you had at the bottom. I really need to make sure this bit is turned tightly because that one's been hanging around whilst I've been crocheting. Go. Make sure you're not coming through on the other side with your needle, otherwise you'll start getting pulls of yarn. So you just need to go through the front or the back loops, depending if you're working on the right or wrong side. Give that one a good tug because I don't want it to look too obvious that that was my slip knot. Okay, and then need to do the final weave through just to make sure that's nice and secure. You don't need to weave through twice. I just prefer to. I think that's just come out the end of the needle there. There we go. There we are. And there we have our coffee cozy, all ready for those cold winter days when we can wrap our hands around our coffee or a hot chocolate, but make sure we don't burn our fingers. So I was just playing around with our coffee cozy, and I've just realised it actually fits quite nicely around. I better not tip it up, drink will go everywhere. Fits quite nicely around a drinks can. So if you like having your drinks cold, but actually holding onto your can is a little more painful because it's too cold, then you can actually slot your coffee cozy around your can. Just be careful that it doesn't pop out through the bottom, because unlike the coffee cups which go out at the top, the can is straight up and down, so it would actually come out if you're not careful. But just a quick tip for something you could use. Very nice. So there we have another video in our Conquer Crochet's basic patterns for beginners. Like I said, if you've missed any of the stitches, you can link into the cards above. And if you've missed last week's video, you can click in the videos that are here. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single stitch.
If you really enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up in the likes below, and I will see you in the next one. Happy hooking!